At the end of the day, you're going to want something, and someone is always trying to sell it to you. You are not immune to propaganda, and you never will be.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Void Theater. As always, I'm your host Alexander, and today I want to talk about the business side of animation. So for anyone who's been around for a while, you'll know that I like to talk about the business side of the animation industry. To me, it's as important as the artistic side because it can actively define what does and doesn't get made. Things like the Batman embargo and the infamous Spider-Man do's and don'ts list are probably some of the most famous things to come out of this side of the industry. But you can't really talk about that side of animation without talking about marketing. And you can't talk about marketing without bringing up Disney. Because the truth is, love it or hate it, Disney has actively defined both animation and in some cases the laws around it since the very beginning. And as much fun as it would be to lambaste Disney for their terrible copyright law interference, that's actually not what this video is about. No, the main topic of today's video is about advertising. That thing you think you're immune to, but aren't. You wanna know how I know that? Because YouTube advertised this to you and you clicked on it. Remember what Garfield said?
You are not immune to propaganda, and you never will be.
And he's right, none of us are immune to propaganda. And if anyone knows this, it's Disney because they're the masters of it. They've been making such effective advertising strategies that even now, chances are that some of you born after the downfall of VHS can remember the adverts they had on them. That's how invasive those were.
Coming soon to own on video and DVD.
Yeah, you remember that? For half you, I just triggered a flashback so intense you'd think you just time traveled. But that's the point. Disney is a master of advertising and marketing. Except apparently when it comes to Pixar. Because looking at the latest movies, you start to notice a striking trend in how they've been advertising them. So today, let's break down what's going on with Disney and Pixar. Go over the last 3 movies, how their advertising played out, and whether this was intentional. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. But without any further ado, we can begin. So let's raise the curtain, put this company on stage, and see what's going on. Alright, so let's start this by going over the 3 most recent Disney films and looking at their advertising. So, first up is Lightyear, the ham and cheese sandwich of Disney movies. Not bad, but just bland enough to make you never want to eat it that often. So, obvious jokes about Lightyear's mediocrity aside, this movie did have one thing going for it, and it's that it was blatantly, obviously connected to the Toy Story series. Throughout the entirety of the lead up to this movie, that's all it was advertised as. This is the movie that led to the Buzz Lightyear action figure. This is the next step in a Toy Story universe. Come see the movie that made Andy want to get a Buzz Lightyear toy. It was everywhere. From the ads to conversations on Twitter and Reddit. If you were talking about this movie, there's a decent chance you weren't actually talking about the movie itself, but more so how it tied into Toy Story. And by the way, that's not hyperbole. That's literally how the movie starts and how it was advertised. And if we're being honest, that carried a lot of weight in the advertising department for this movie. But it also wasn't the only thing that Disney was using to push it, because the advertising for this movie was everywhere. Even before it came out, there were toys of Socks the Cat and Zurg. Lego had 3 building sets made, there was food tie-in deals, and even a half-hour documentary dedicated to the conception of this movie. To say that Disney was going all in on this would be, frankly, kind of an understatement, which makes it all the more ironic considering the film was, by most people's estimates, a financial disaster. And when I say most, I mean literally everyone. But it's true. This movie barely broke even and was almost immediately being forced into Disney Plus with the hopes of recouping some of its money. And that right there is the main issue. For all intents and purposes, this was a movie that should have been 20 times more successful than it was, and yet by all numbers failed both financially and in terms of the public's reception. Now, was that all due to advertising? Obviously not, but I can't imagine any CEO was going to be happy seeing such a mediocre return on what should have been a slam dunk movie. And as we'll get to in a second, it won't be the last time this happens. Which actually does bring us to the next movie, Turning Red. Now, before we dive too deep into this, it's only fair that I mention that Turning Red had a massive handicap in terms of its box office return. This film was set to have a full-on theatrical release, but with the rise of the COVID-19 Omicron variant, the film was pushed to Disney Plus almost instantly, which did in turn greatly impact the numbers for its box office. But in terms of its advertising budget, it was up there with Lightyear's and honestly a little beyond that. Because despite being an original film, it had commercials everywhere. Like Lightyear, there was tie-in deals with books, trailers shown at film festivals. They even had a deal with Mozilla Firefox to have the film advertised throughout them and had an entire airplane decorated with the main character. In fact, according to one report, Disney had spent up to $23 million on advertising alone, literally doubling the amount of what they spent on Cruella's movie. But again, that's the point, isn't it? Even with COVID bringing everything down, Disney at the bare minimum wanted this movie to make a return on its advertising investment. So, how did it do? Well, not great. With a budget of $23.6 million spent on advertising it, Turning Red only managed to make a whopping $20 million back. And again, I do want to point out that this was during the height of a new COVID variant, and with how the viewer reception and Nielsen ratings were on Disney+, it potentially would have had a much more profitable outing had the pandemic not forced most things to shut down again. But the point still remains that even accounting for all of that, Turning Red would have been seen as a net loss in the eyes of a money-hungry company like Disney. And for them, a net loss might as well mean no profits at all. And it's not helped by the fact that at this point, Disney was essentially 0-2 in terms of financial hits. Lightyear may have made its budget back in the box office, but it was only by a very slim margin at only $26.4 million, which, while a lot for us, is virtually nothing for a spin-off based on one of the most famous animated movies of all time. So, what does it have to do with Pixar being screwed over by Disney? Well, when you look at the last two movies they released, you see a striking issue. Both movies were, to be frank, advertised out the ass. Lightyear was on everything Disney could force it to be on, and despite Turning Red being an original concept, it was advertised so hard it set records both for its budget and for the most viewed TV spot ever at number 16. Not number 10, but still pretty damn high. But the point still remains that Disney saw these as losses and in turn pulled back funding for advertising on the next release. And that brings us to the most recent release, and unfortunately the one that got the short end of the stick, Elemental. Now, chances are that if you know about Elemental, it's more than likely from videos and YouTube thumbnails like this. And just to be fair to those content creators, they have valid reasons for those thumbnails, because Elemental is one of Pixar's worst performing movies in a long time. And no small part of that public perception is because of how it was advertised, because this movie had terrible advertising. You know, I said that both Lightyear and Turning Red had substantial amounts of time and effort put into their advertisements to convince people to go see them? Well, Elemental had none of that. In fact, aside from the standard things you would expect a Disney or Pixar movie to have, Elemental only really had one standout advertisement.
Welcome back to the Idol finale.
Yeah, that was it. A 19-second loop on American Idol, which I'm sure really got the 65 to fresh in the grave demographic ready to go see this movie. But the point remains that in terms of advertising, Disney was doing the bare minimum to make sure word got out for this film, which is why it's no surprise that for most people who had actually heard of the film, they had no real desire to see it. Because if I'm being honest, the advertisements for this movie are frankly terrible. Nearly every single ad that aired easily made this movie look like one of the most generic looking animated movies to come out in a long time. And while that would have been an issue in and of itself, it certainly didn't help that the movie was coming out next to Across the Spider-Verse, which was hammering people with ads and tie-in deals. Now at this point, I do want to point out that Elemental has made back its budget and a substantial amount. As of the time of this writing, the movie has managed to pull in $423.7 million, but the other side of that is that less than $200 million of that was domestically. And right now, I want to make something clear. This is an animation channel. I review cartoons and animated media. By any and all metrics, I am the core target audience for a movie like this. And I could count on my fingers the number of times I saw advertisements for this movie. And even when I did see the ads for it, none of them made it appealing. And that brings us back to that central question. Has Disney been fucking with Pixar? And if it wasn't obvious from the entire tone of this video, the answer is a resounding yes. But we can actually see why. Because looking at the order of film releases, we can see what went wrong over the last few years. With Turning Red, it was obviously less an issue of trying to see a return on the box office and more just trying to make back the marketing budget from its theater release, which it sadly didn't do. Then you have Lightyear, which again, by all accounts, should have been an easy slam dunk on profit returns. At this point, theaters were opening back up and people were dying to go out and enjoy themselves. Just not with Lightyear. And add on to the fact that this was again a movie with deep ties to one of the most famous animated movies of all time, barely making a return was essentially a death sentence. Just a reminder that a movie typically needs to double its budget cost to be a success. Lightyear didn't break $230 million. Its budget was $200. So not only did it underperform, it might have honestly been better for it to just become a Disney Plus movie in the first place and save on the advertising budget. And that brings us back to Elemental, which again, I do want to point out did technically become a success, but that was through no small feat. The movie has already been in talks about extending its window through Labor Day to draw more people in. It's had to deal with more than a few magazines listing it as one of Pixar's worst recent releases, and it had to do all that on top of dealing with easily one of the worst marketing campaigns from Disney that I've personally ever seen. Anyone know the punchline to all this? It's that realistically, some Disney CEO jackass is going to take the lesson from this and believe that this was the right way to advertise, which just means that the next movie to come out is going to have even more of an uphill battle than Elemental. Because again, as much as we want to pretend that we're this solid piece of rock against the wave of commercialism, we aren't. Commercials, and to a larger extent advertising divisions, exist for a reason. Always remember what Garfield said.
At the end of the day, you're going to want something, and someone is always trying to sell it to you. You are not immune to propaganda, and you never will be.
So sure, we can all say that we ignore commercials, but the truth is, a lot of us are lying. But with that, we come to the conclusion of this video on Disney versus Pixar. And as always, with the current closing, I'll leave you with some questions. For the people that saw Elemental, what made you want to go see it? And if you had to change how the movie had been handled, how would you have advertised it personally? Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. But until next time, I've been your host Alexander, and I hope to see you back in my theater.